Okay, good morning, everybody. I am super glad that dresses are now usually made with pockets and to be back with you guys, right? I love a good pocket. And to be back with you guys this morning. Last night was the museum, absolutely phenomenal. Thank you for inviting me to join you. I had the pleasure of sitting next to Laura last night, and after the remarks, which were very moving for me, so much of what was shared, I just wanted to raise my hand and say, yes, I love everything that you're talking about here. And in the conversation with Laura, I was sharing this kind of realization I was having. So I have a 17-year-old daughter, and she's very motivated to learn. And when she was very young, we put her in soccer. She loved it. And then she went into club, kind of competitive soccer. Does anybody in this room support a child in a club sport of some kind? Right? It is a lot. And I think over time, the competition and the pressure and the comparison to other teams and other players really chipped away at what she loved about soccer. And she finally decided, I don't want to play anymore. I don't enjoy it anymore. And I said, okay, I don't need to drive you all over the state of California if your heart's not in it anymore. And then out of nowhere, at the age of 17, literally 3 months ago, she said, I want to try ice skating. I said, okay, I don't really know if people pick up ice skating at 17 regularly, but you're welcome to try it. I didn't really think anything would happen. She finds so much joy in this sport. She is not on a team. She does not compete. She has one 20-minute lesson with a teacher who's giving her the techniques. She goes to that rink 5 days a week for 2 hours of her own volition. And she comes home and she talks about what she's done and how she felt. And to me, it's like seeing that joy. It really speaks to what can happen when we let students discover and grow without all that competition, without all the pressure. It was just a really interesting moment of realization for me. So I'm very excited to get to onboard you all to another strategy and allow you to experience it and play with it. It really does still fall under this umbrella of how do we help students discover? How do we get that kind of spark of curiosity back in our students? Because I think what we know from the research is that at about age or grade 3, that spark starts to fade for a lot of students in school. So the strategy that we're going to play with today is a choose your learning path adventure. And in all transparency, I remember getting really excited about this concept during COVID. I was supporting thousands of teachers online, trying to figure out how do we engage students in an online environment, taking that teacher-led whole group, lots of information transfer and teacher talk into the Zoom or the Google Meet or whatever environment they were in was not yielding really great results. A lot of students were not turning on their cameras, they were not engaging, and I thought, gosh, how do we get students who are feeling so removed from class and teachers and community and the learning, how do we get them leaning back in this moment when they're not in physical spaces together? And that was really where the Choose Your Learning Path adventure for me got started. And the design work for me really took place. And it was grounded in what I already knew at that point around what we need as humans to be motivated. And we've talked a lot about that in the last 2 days. But I wanted to figure out, how do I tap into their need for autonomy, their desire for competence, and their need for relatedness. So when we talk about autonomy, it is those choices that we give students. When we talk about competence, it's, do I feel confident as a learner in my ability to do what I'm being asked to do? And if there's just one way to do whatever that thing is, some learners may not feel very confident that they can be successful. And if they don't have that confidence, they may not even try, right? And then the relatedness is that feeling of connection to community. So from kind of what I know about what we need to be motivated, I started to play with this idea. And what I see is the benefits of this Choose Your Learning Path adventure is it prioritizes student agency throughout the process, right? It gives students a higher degree of control over both the pace of their learning and the path that they take through the learning experience. It also frees the teacher. As students are self-pacing, whether they're moving through a choose your learning path on their own, with a partner, as part of a group, the teacher should be freed to maximize their impact by working directly with small groups and individual students. So often when I'm working with teachers, how I'll position the first time they use this is I'll say, okay, you ended a unit of study. You gave some kind of a summative assessment likely. What did that data, what did you learn from your students' summative assessment? You probably learned that some of them are quite strong in terms of their concept knowledge and skill set. Some might be a little wobbly, right? There's certain things that they're still struggling with, that they need more support, more instruction, more guidance. And then there might just be some who really need a lot more reteach and teacher time and energy input. Unfortunately, when we get to the end of a unit of study, most kids get an exam of some kind, the data gets put into a grade book, and we just move on. We're not addressing the needs and the foundational kind of the strength of their concept and skill knowledge before we build on it. And so using a strategy like Choose Your Adventure for a teacher usually who might be hesitant, I say this creates a space where you can get kids exploring what they're about to learn while you have time to really work with learners to fill particular gaps, meet specific needs, and really provide that teacher time and energy that they might need. Although teachers can use this anytime, but when I'm trying to sell it for the first time, that's usually how I position it. So it aligns with the UDL principles because students get to decide, how do I want to try to acquire information, right? Much like you guys yesterday choosing between the art or the writing, the artwork, and the videos, right? The same kind of philosophy you're gonna see in the Choose Your Learning Path adventure as well. But also, how do they want to express, share, or transfer their learning is a central part of this as well. So often people will ask, well, what would make a good Choose Your Learning Path adventure? And the answer is probably just about anything, but we could have students exploring a new idea, exploring an issue related to the course. We can present a high interest, or if we use essential questions to guide courses of study, we can present those as well for students to explore and dive into. Whether it's a phenomenon, a moment in history, a famous person, a social or art movement, they can explore in a Choose Your Learning Path adventure. Or if we're really trying to figure out how do we make a bridge between what students are learning in this course and the world beyond, a Choose Your Learning Path adventure can be a wonderful way to make those real world connections for our learners in the classroom. So the design, and there's a few ways to design them, but I've chosen just kind of a basic choice board because, again, this is something that some teachers have seen, they might be familiar with, and then we're just going to use this structure to design a Choose Your Learning Path adventure. So there are 3 different stops in this learning adventure. The first column is the acquire column. How is the student going to choose to engage with and acquire new information? Does the student feel like one of the pathways presented is going to be most effective for them? Do they like to read? Would they prefer to read? Would they like to watch a video or listen to a podcast? Once they've made a decision, and this is important for you all because you're going to be moving through your own adventure, they start on this side and they move to the opposite side, making a choice in each column. So they're going to choose something from the acquire column to learn about whatever this thing is that the adventure is focused on. In the middle is the meaning-making section. And when I work with teachers, this is often the hardest column for them to fill in. How do we help students to make meaning, to kind of process and contextualize this new information? And so we have some students who might really enjoy making a concept map or a graphic connecting big ideas and concepts. Others might really prefer that verbal exchange with a partner or a small group talking about what they just learned in the acquire column. And others are more tactile. They might like to tinker or build or do a little experiment to test an idea, to affirm something they think they learned in that acquire column. The third column is transfer. How are we going to apply our learning and share what we learned? And often when we're asking students to demonstrate their learning, share their learning, again, this is one of those moments where there's often just a single pathway, but we know not all students express and communicate their learning in the same way. Some might do very well verbally articulating what they learned, explaining a concept, walking us through a process, explaining how they would apply this idea to this particular situation. I would much prefer to write. I feel much more confident expressing my ideas in writing, and so we have some students like that. Others who are much more artistic. They might like to draw or create a flow chart to demonstrate what they learned in this adventure. So the goal is at each stop, they have an opportunity to make a meaningful choice, choose a pathway that works for them, and hopefully that removes barriers and allows them to feel both a degree of autonomy, but also a higher degree of competence so that they're feeling they can be more successful in the learning experience. And I've had the pleasure of working with teachers kindergarten through 12th grade, adapting this concept for different topics. I remember working with this very energized 6th or 7th grade math teacher, and she said, gosh, I've done so much instruction on fractions. I just keep going back over fractions, and my kids are really struggling. So instead of a first introduction to fractions, her Choose Your Learning Path adventure was all about trying to help them get re-exposed and acquire information in a different way that wasn't her, because she felt like it wasn't as successful as she had hoped. And then also allowing students different opportunities for that meaning making and that transfer. Now, this morning, we've heard about AI. It is all anybody wants to talk about in education, it feels like lately. And one of the ways that I talk about AI or have positioned AI in relation to my own work is often teachers, when we talk about strategies like Choose Your Learning Path adventure, they'll say things like, well, that's a nice idea, but like, who has time to plan all that, right? I think if we weren't taking so much grading home and grading everything, we'd have more time to design really fun student-centered learning experiences, but this is just my opinion. So one of the things I think AI is really exciting in relation to is being able to design with a higher level of intentionality for a more equitable learning experience in a fraction of the time. So there are a bunch of AI-powered education tools. I'm sure we will see a flurry of them, and they will evolve. But just to give you an example, I was working in a coaching session with a science teacher, and I pitched this idea. What do you think? You ended this unit. We're looking at this data. There's clearly kiddos who need more support and instruction before we move on. And so what's something you'd like students to maybe begin to explore in a Choose Your Learning Path adventure? And we use an AI tool called Magic School, and it has this feature. It's a choice board generator. And then we put in the grade level, so it's 9th grade science. We told it, so it has a place for a learning goal, a standard, objective, a topic. So we said that we wanted to kind of introduce students to mitosis. And then we put in the additional details for the choice board, very explicit instructions. This is how many columns we want. We want the first column to be acquiring information, the second column to be meaning-making activities, the third column to be transfer and application opportunities for students. And literally, one of the things I stress when I work with teachers is the input in AI is directly going to impact the output. So it has to be specific and detailed. This is the thing I think if you're going to provide professional learning for your teachers on AI, thinking about how to help them use the tools really effectively. Because what I don't want is for teachers to just be throwing a standard or an objective in there and just taking a lesson without really architecting it, right, for their specific students. So then, as soon as we input the additional information, it spits out this kind of draft of some ideas. And for our students who might not be native English speakers, there's even translation tools, which is really exciting. And so the draft is not done, but it's a wonderful starting spot, right? We were able to go in and add resource links. We were able to build out the descriptions. But from a teacher perspective, it just lowered the cognitive load to create something like this. And it really did cut the time required into like a fraction of what it would have been. So what you all are going to be doing is playing with this learning kind of structure or strategy but to explore personal growth. So in your playlist, you're going to see a link to a Choose Your Learning Path adventure. You'll be moving from left to right on the choice board, choosing one item from each column: the acquire, meaning making, transfer. You're welcome to work on your own at your own pace. If you want to partner with somebody, you're welcome to do that as well. Make the experience optimal for you and your learning preferences. We're going to have 45 minutes, so hopefully you won't feel rushed through this experience. We really want you to lean in and do it as a learner, but also kind of have in the back of your mind that teacher or educator hat on, thinking about how you can imagine this being used in schools with learners. All right, I will come around if you're having any trouble accessing the choice board. I will start the timer in just 2 moments. But we have things like capstone project. What jobs can robots do? Anything that's like a complex concept or hard to understand concept, or even a topic that doesn't have a single answer. In what ways is Hebrew the language of Israel, and in what ways is Hebrew the language of the Jewish people? What kind of person was Abraham? What makes literature literature? What biblical characters make good role models? Higher level thinking concepts. Let's see, I feel like there's another one some really great questions. How do we, different groups and cultures, define happiness? So lots of different directions that we could take a Choose Your Learning Path adventure, but truly the goal of this experience is to position the student to explore, to make meaning, to be able to take what they have, the information they've acquired, the meaning they've been able to make, and do something with it, right? Apply it, transfer it, describe their learning in a meaningful way. So now we've talked about some of the types of concepts, the kinds of questions, maybe some of the topics we might include in a Choose Your Learning Path adventure. We've talked about it as maybe being the beginning of a unit of study or a learning cycle to kind of pique student interest. If they are exploring an essential question, it might be something that runs parallel to a unit of study or a learning cycle, really driving deep engagement around that essential question. Or if we're trying to make a link between the curriculum and the world outside the classroom, maybe it is something that they're doing at any point during that learning process. So as always, I want to give you guys a chance to reflect. And I would say to kind of be honest about the experience from your perspective. Is there another resource that you kind of wish had been included because maybe the types of media in there didn't speak to you? Is there a meaning-making activity you enjoyed or was kind of new for you, or one that wasn't on there that you wish had been included? And even with the application. And one of the questions I got that I thought was really a fabulous question and something I wanted to articulate the answer to for the whole group was, can we use these structures with elementary? I wish we were, right? The structures are usable K-12, the instructional strategies. What changes, because I've done this in kindergarten, first and second grade, and man, those teachers deserve so much respect for the foundation that they lay that us in older grades build on. The difference is, I'll articulate it briefly in 3 kind of quick points. One is the runway, the onboarding process, right? Kindergarten and first grade, all of this work, so for example, reciprocal teaching yesterday, using these comprehension strategies with young learners who are just learning to read, might not even be able to read, is all happening at teacher-led stations. It is teacher-guided, it is teacher-facilitated. Even when students really understand how do I make a prediction? How do I ask a question? How do I, point out something that's confusing, right? We might not use the word clarifier with kinder or first grade, and really get them excited and confident they can do those things. They can engage in a reciprocal teaching around a very simple text or a text that's being read to them with teacher guidance. So it's kind of the onboarding, the length of that runway is much longer for younger children. The complexity and the rigor of the kinds of things we would include are going to be different and age appropriate, right? So a second grade teacher is going to be probably the best person to decide, what are my students ready for? What is developmentally appropriate if we're going to use one of these strategies? And third is the amount of scaffolding and support that we're providing learners as they navigate these strategies. If we were starting in the earlier grades, then it would be much easier as they move up to high school, into high school, to kind of do these things as well. The challenge when they've never experienced these more self-directed, student-centered learning strategies, instructional strategies, is that by the time they get to middle school and high school, a lot of them have already retreated a little and don't feel like actively engaging is something they have to do, right? So they almost push back. One of the real truths that I'm very honest with teachers about and educators when I work with them is we're striving to create student-centered classrooms, but we need to acknowledge it is more cognitively and socially challenging to be a student in a student-centered classroom. It is much easier cognitively and socially to be a student in a teacher-centered classroom where the teacher is doing most of the work. And so that's something that as we start at younger grades, we can kind of foster these students who expect to be active agents as they progress through school. So I never want teachers to say, oh, but I teach first grade, I teach second grade, I teach a kinder, I can't do these things. It's like, yes, you can. The runway will just be longer, right? The teacher input and time will be longer. The things that you focus on won't be as complex because we really want to help them build that foundation and that confidence that they can do these things. So I want to give you guys a chance to, if you want to reflect in your playlist, fantastic. If you want to have a conversation with a partner or with a group, what are your thoughts on the structure, the format of the Choose Your Learning Path adventure? How can using a strategy like this engage students in self-paced discovery and meaning making and hopefully help to foster and build these elements that are so important to motivation, right? The relatedness, mastery, even having a sense of purpose. And how might teachers utilize their time? If we're leaning on a structure like this that probably weaves in some technology, how might they use their time with students to have that maximum impact? And as students work, how might the teacher kind of really connect with individual small group and facilitate kind of that personalized or differentiated learning for them? All right, 10 minutes, chat, reflect, and then we'll pull you guys back together. If I am a teacher and we're covering a topic and I want to give students meaningful choice, I might pull a podcast, right, from a kid-friendly website on a topic. I might pull or create a video of my own, depending. I have some educator control issues, so I make a lot of my own videos. And I might find a text on the topic. But you're absolutely right. Obviously, these were not things I selected for you guys for this acquire, but the depth, the exact information, it's not going to be identical. And so I think what we need to do is be thoughtful that we know what we've chosen in terms of what is the content, where might certain gaps be, but this is never going to be the only exposure to whatever this topic is. So typically it is either a supplement to the other instruction that we're doing or an extension where it's like, it would be great if you knew all of the things, but you don't actually need to know all the things. What I want you to just have is a stronger sense of whatever this thing is. But you're right, and it's so fascinating because a lot of teachers get kind of hung up on, this says everything I wanted to say, so I just want kids to do this. And this says some interesting stuff, but not enough. And so it is a little bit of a challenge. And sometimes teachers will choose like 2 different videos or 2 different articles because they're shorter or they cover different things, but it's not going to be comprehensive and identical. And that can be a challenge. But I think as long as we're thinking about, okay, from an instructional strategy as the teacher, how are we addressing the pieces that certain students might not have gotten, then it's less stressful. And I think maybe one of the things based on the conversation that I could have done better as a facilitator, because one of the comments was, I think it would have worked better if we had stopped after each of the columns and like had a debrief or did something together. And I said, I can't do that because then I wouldn't be modeling self-pacing, right? So self-pacing, which maybe I didn't emphasize enough. And for that, I love that feedback because it is so important. the two big benefits of a choose your learning path adventure are the pathway, right? The choice, but the self-pacing. Just knowing we read at different paces. If I'm watching a video, I might need to pause and rewind. As I'm watching, I might be drawing or taking notes or doing whatever helps me process new information before I get to that meaning-making column. And so it is a little bit of a challenge because it's a chunk of time and you're moving at your own pace, and some people get distracted, but that self-pacing is a really important piece of it. And so I wanted to acknowledge that. And I think one of the things that was great about the conversation with your table specifically is hitting the bumps and the things about the experience. You're like, wait a second, this didn't work for me, or I struggled here, or like, what if we did this? It's not like that's why you experience a strategy, right? Because then you're thinking more deeply about it and how it could actually work best for your particular learners. And so I think the feedback of, hey, what about maybe introducing it this way? Or what about adding this? Like, that's wonderful. And I love feedback because one of the things, I think the thing that we do as educators that's maybe most important is just modeling. And I tell teachers all the time, ask your students for feedback. If you're trying something new, how did it go for them, right? Like, they're the consumers in education. We're creating these experiences, but what is it like from their perspective? What are they struggling with? What are they enjoying? Do they have suggestions? And that's a tough sell for teachers, right? Because students are super honest. And we're trying really hard to create these experiences for them. And it's hard to hear when it's not working well, but it's amazing what you can learn about little moves to improve the experience over time if we're open to that feedback, open to those conversations and hearing what they're struggling with. And sometimes the things they're struggling with, it's like, oh, I never would have realized that, but there's a quick thing or an easy kind of scaffold I could provide, or another option I could have provided that would have been better. So even if the experience was like, oh, I really struggled, or I kind of checked out, or I didn't love this, or this didn't work for me, all of that is good to note for yourselves as we move forward, thinking about how these strategies might work in a classroom. Yeah.
What do you see as the most common challenges in the classroom? Teachers who are beginning to implement it last month.
I think it's releasing control. It is like being okay with it being a little messy at first, right? We have not a lot of time together. So obviously, if you were my students and younger, there would be an onboarding process. There would be some modeling. We'd practice. You guys get kind of thrown into it as adult learners. But when teachers hear about a new strategy that they're intrigued by, they want to try, they put so much pressure on themselves and their students to like get it right out the gate. And that's just not how it works. Like I tell teachers, if you've been teaching a while and you're comfortable doing it the way you do it, it works for you, then you have to remember, kind of reimagine what was it like that first year of teaching? Because for most of us, first year of teaching, we left a lot of those lessons going, yikes, that was a total train wreck. I learned a lot about what I'm not gonna do next time. And that's the same, anytime we pick up something new, it's like, we're gonna hit bumps. There's gonna be challenges. There's gonna be kids who aren't bought in, or they're distracted, or they struggle, they hit a bump, and that's okay. I think the more willing we are as educators to be vulnerable, to take risks, to say, hey, I've never done this before. We're gonna try it. We're gonna see how it goes. And then we're gonna have a conversation about how can we make it better. Then now we're creating learning environments where it's okay for them to take a risk, for them to potentially fail or not do great, learn from it, and just continue to improve. Teachers, I think a lot of them are like, okay, I want to try something new, but like, what if a school leader admin is in my room and this lesson ends up going off the rails? Or yeah, what if a parent, is like, why are you doing that in class? So there is a lot of articulating the why for students, for families. Hey, to leadership, I want to try this, but it might be rough in the beginning, but this is really what we're working toward. That communication piece for all the stakeholders involved is really important. When I work with schools around implementing change, right, it really has to be school embraced and a cultural shift a little bit of how we do things. Just for the school leaders to kind of pique your interest, one of the things we've done is something called Wednesday walks, where Wednesday we're all committed to trying something new, a strategy, an instructional model. And then it's not just the school leader, although yes, get into more classrooms, please see what's happening. But the teachers will put on their door that day a QR code. And any other teacher who has a prep that period, the school leaders who come in, they scan the QR code, they watch as much of the strategy or lesson as they can, and the QR code takes them just a quick Google form that's asking and prompting for feedback in specific areas, so that now it's like an invitation to experiment. It's an invitation to learn from my peers, to give feedback in a kind and constructive way, and it can be so powerful. The discussions we are just scratching the surface of are conversations I want you to be able to dig into in your groups and take them deeper and further. Initially, I think we were kind of hoping you would, and if you want to have discussions about personal growth or the choice board, you are more than welcome. But I think what I'm hearing in this room is a real desire to talk about tough things in education and to talk about how do we move forward as educators, as leaders with our students in really exciting ways. And so I'm going to use this as a shift, but not to shut down the conversation, just to shift it a little bit and onboard you to yet another strategy to try to help students kind of own their learning experience as much as possible. So the shifts that we've been talking about, the first two are really from information transfer to try to explore ways to facilitate student discovery, and so that we're not always stuck at that front of the room. Reciprocal teaching is one. Jigsaw, which was mentioned, is another one. Choose Your Learning Path Adventure is another. These all come from a book I wrote. The second chapter in that book is about moving from whole group teacher-led discussions to small group student-led discussions. And so you're going to get a chance, obviously, like everything we've done together, to engage in a discussion. But before we do, I want to talk barriers. So one of the things in my work with teachers that I focus on a lot, because, you know, teachers are comfortable teaching the way they've been teaching for a long time. And so I get a lot of pushback. Why would we do this? What's the value? Show me the research, right? And I'm happy to do all those things. But I also want to be really honest about barriers that exist in the traditional approaches that we're using. Barriers that make it very hard for students to be successful, to participate, to execute certain tasks. And so as just kind of an entry point into this next, as we shift into student-led discussion, I want you to have just a quick 3-minute brainstorm chat. What barriers might make it challenging for all students in a class to participate in a kind of real-time, rapid-fire, teacher-led whole group discussion? What makes it hard for them to maybe share their ideas in that whole group context? And you can either do this as a quick brainstorm and chat at your groups. If you want to kind of brainstorm on your playlist, great. You have 3 minutes. Think of everything you can imagine standing in the way of a student being successful in this whole group teacher-led discussion. So I heard a lot of different ideas being shared. Somebody was making the comment that all they do is chat outside the classroom, and then sometimes when they're faced with a question in the classroom, they're not really sure what to say, or they might not know how to respond. I remember one of the big complaints that I had as a teacher when I would think about whole group discussion was my discussion dominators, right? Like, I always felt like it was the same 4 or 5 students who talked all the time, not necessarily because they had the most enlightening or accurate things to share, but just because they loved to chat and they were really super comfortable being vocal. But when I took a good hard look at who was actually talking the most in a whole group discussion, it was me, the teacher in the room, because I felt pressure to respond to every single comment, right? So either it was, I'm validating that you made a really good point, or I'm helping you make a connection between what you said and what this other student said, or I'm gently correcting something that you said that isn't quite accurate. So it was actually my voice that was the most dominant in the conversation when I thought about it. It might be that students aren't really listening to each other, so when they talk, the contributions feel really disconnected. Anybody else have one that you want to share that came up for you in your chat?
They sometimes talk to each other, and then you don't hear, not everyone gains from what the other one is hard to discuss.
Right. So side conversations that are, one, not something everybody's benefiting from, but also, I don't know about other people, side conversations are super distracting for me. And I feel like if somebody else is talking and there's a side conversation, then I just feel uncomfortable because I'm like, this is not respectful to the person who is talking. So that's really hard, right? What else? Any others that came up that you want to share? Oh yeah, fear of judgment, right? The kind of the social, the very quiet kind of social cues happening in a classroom, fear that they might not be right? There's not that safe space to offer an idea, and even if it's not right, that should be okay, but they don't necessarily feel that it's okay. So when we think about the benefits of moving from a whole group teacher-led discussion to a small group student-led discussion, is really probably the biggest benefit is equity of voice, right? Everybody has an opportunity to have a voice in that conversation. When we facilitate a whole group discussion, unless we're using a protocol like, say, maybe the Socrative seminar approach where we're dedicating the entire class to it and everybody's going to speak, there often isn't that opportunity for every student to have a voice in the discussion. Yet getting them to a space where they can have a discussion that is not controlled by the teacher it's a little bit of a journey, and it's terrifying for teachers. I will sometimes work with high school groups on station rotation, and I will talk about the benefit of offline station, engage students in a small student-led discussion, and the teacher's eyes just like, what? These kids are gonna have a chat and like, I'm not going to be there to kind of control the whole situation? And just a part of me inside is like, they can almost, or maybe can, drive a car, right? Like, they should be able to have a little chat in a circle without us controlling the whole thing. So how do we set them up for success? Because there are a lot of problems beyond simply the discussion being filtered through the teacher, right? We have us doing the lion's share, not just of the talking, but also the critical thinking. Right? Are students really thinking critically about what their peers are saying in that whole group dynamic where they can participate if they want, they can pay attention if they want, they can kind of tune out if they want. And so it's us as educators who are identifying the strong points, making the connections, identifying the misconceptions. We want students to start to cultivate those skills as well. They all don't have necessarily an opportunity to participate or a voice in what's discussed. Right? There's no agency in the actual questions they chat about. So I'm not saying that teachers can't give students a list of questions to discuss, but let's also invite them to add some of their own questions to the list. What are they curious about? What are they confused about? What are they wondering about that they would enjoy adding to this list of discussion questions? And then it's that equity of voice that is really challenging, right? Making sure that there actually is space for everybody to contribute their ideas and feel like a valuable part of this conversation. So we are going to move through a four-step process. Now, I have had some lovely interactions with some folks in this room who are like, I get the technology thing, but it's not my thing. And I'm like, got it. So you can do this online or you can do this offline. I want to show you, and I'm going to be stepping you through this progression just to show you how we support, when I go me and the teacher I'm working with, are supporting students in this progression. So we are currently on shifting to student-led discussions. If you're like, no, I really like technology, the digital piece, that works for me, you're going to see here a small group discussion-led kind of HyperDoc experience. If you want to use this as your visual reference, if you want to make a copy of it and do each of the steps as I guide you through on this, fantastic. If you have a scratch piece of paper and you're like, I just want to write this stuff out, I feel like I need a tactile experience, absolutely feel free. You can do this on paper. You don't need to use the HyperDoc, but you are welcome to.
For anybody close to.
And I will Vanna White them around the room as soon as we get started, okay? But I'm going to start you off on this first piece. I'm going to start you off on this first piece, and then I'll run and grab the paper for those who want it. So the first thing we do.
I'm going
to put my hand back up. I'm going to make you all do it.
No.
So the first thing we do, this is really important with young learners, is we start in a space of reflection, which I think normally we think of reflection as coming at the end, and we are going to have a bit of that on the end too. But in the beginning, I want you, not yet, in just a moment, you're going to think about, we've been having tons of discussions in here. We have discussions all the time in our lives. what are kind of your pet peeves in discussion, right? So for me, side conversations that's definitely a pet peeve because I just start to feel anxious because I'm like, wait, somebody's talking, let's pay attention. Eye contact is kind of another one. Like when I talk with somebody, I kind of want them to like look at me. That's important. It feels important, like you're paying attention. And then what are your essential traits? I like to joke that I feel like a bit of a Hermione Granger, right? Like I always feel like I have 100 things I want to share. I'm so excited to participate. And I have to remember I am not the only person in this group. There are other people and I have 2 ears, so I really need to listen. So that's something I need to work on. So those are my pet peeves and my essential traits. So I want you to take 2-3 minutes either on the digital document, on paper, and if you need it, I'll be coming around and passing it out on the tables. Just think about, and for you, just silently on paper or on that document first, take a quiet moment to reflect, capture your pet peeves and your essential traits as a participant in discussion, and then in about 3 minutes, I'm gonna pull you back, which should be easy because this is just kind of a quiet reflection. All right. Step 2 in this pre-discussion process is for you to have the agency to generate questions you would enjoy discussing. These can be about any of the strategies you've engaged with. They could be questions that surface for you in the conversation we were just having pre a transition. They could be questions about personal growth, your own experience at your school. Whatever questions are kind of burning for you in this moment, you're curious about, you're wrestling with, capture those on your paper or on your document. You have another 3-4 minutes to write out your question. So in the kind of continuation of the conversation about barriers, one of the things that we can do, even in a discussion, to remove barriers is to build in meaningful choice. How do students want to engage in a discussion? And so there are a couple different strategies or techniques that you guys are going to get to choose from. And so I'm going to skip ahead. We're not going to do, obviously the discussion isn't happening in this moment, but we want to figure out how to give students agency and choice over the way in which they engage in discussion so that hopefully they're engaging in a way that works for them. And then at the end of discussion is a self-assessment. How did I show up today? What did I do well? What was maybe hindering my participation? What do I want to continue to work on as a participant in a small group discussion? Where are my areas of growth? So this is the progression of setting students up to be more successful as they engage in conversation. And the reason we start with the reflection, so when you guys transition into the discussion, the first thing you're going to do is share your pet peeves and your essential traits. The reason being is it builds empathy and understanding. If I know how you show up in a discussion, if I know what bothers you in a discussion, that's valuable information for me to have before we engage in a discussion. I remember I was working with a group and one of the teachers was sharing her how she shows up, and she says, I hate silence. Whenever there's silence, I just jump in and I start talking because it makes me so uncomfortable. And so she shared it and there was kind of some giggles, but everybody heard it. And then they were in a discussion and there was like a small pause and she jumped in and everybody was just like kind of, we get it. Like if she told us this happens and she was kind of like, oh, I know I do this. So it's really about understanding the people we're having conversations with so that hopefully they go more smoothly. The writing the questions, or at least being able to add to a list of questions with some of their own, is about that agency, right? And hopefully relevance. Like, are we having conversations about things that are interesting and relevant to me as a learner? The discussion options of different techniques is about removing barriers with that agency and choice. And then the assessing their participation is a metacognitive piece, right? Thinking about my learning, thinking about, my strengths and where I need to spend time developing and growing. So for this particular practice, we are just focused on 3 techniques. You have a choice board that has 6 on there. Research really points to the fact that 3 to 4 choices are the sweet spot, right? More than that can be a little daunting. So typically I provide all 6 to educators, but I say choose the 3 you love the most. and use those with students. Because if we're going to give them choices around different techniques, as educators working with younger people, we're going to have to onboard them to each one at a time, right? So the first one you guys have to choose from is called Paraphrase Passport. Paraphrase Passport basically requires that if you are going to enter the conversation, you need to paraphrase what was said before you entered the conversation. So the real goal is I have to listen to what everybody is saying in order to contribute to this conversation, really focusing on those listening skills. The second one is concentric circles. These are for our kiddos who need to move, right? Sitting in a seat all day is not working for them. So there is an inner circle and they face out, and there is an outer circle and they face in. And you have a set amount of time where you are having a one-on-one discussion with the person you are facing, right? So usually it's about 2 minutes. The inner circle, person I'm facing in the outer circle, we have a chat. And then at the end of that 2 minutes, the inner circle takes one step over, they have a new partner, and they have another conversation with that person. So it gives them the opportunity to move, to stand up. It's a discussion, but it's one-on-one, but with multiple people in your group at a time. The third one, I'm going to be really honest, I was very skeptical about this one when I first heard about it, is called Graffiti Teen Time. There is no actual talking happening. You write your question on a piece of paper. So we each take a piece of paper, we write our question at the top. And then we can either physically, if we want to get up, if we're able, we can move to around the table and add our ideas to the paper, contribute that way. We can pass the paper around. We can put them in the center and pull papers as we're ready to respond to them. And what is so fascinating, I was like, well, but they're not really working on their speaking and listening skills. Does it feel like a discussion? The kids who opt for this one are often our students who might be struggling with anxiety. They might need more time to process. They might be feeling a lot of that external pressure and feel more comfortable articulating their ideas in writing. Some of the most profound things I have heard when walking around, seeing students engage in discussion, hasn't been anything verbal. It's been what has been on these pieces of paper, which definitely converted me. I said, this is a really important avenue to provide for those students who want to engage in this way. So you guys are going to have this choice as well as you move into your discussions. Did I turn this off? No? Oh, it's because it's highlighting it. Okay, so what you're gonna do in the time we have before lunch, is you're going to, in your groups, begin just with a quick share of those pet peeves and essential traits. Get to know each other as participants in a discussion. Then you've already written your questions, so you don't need to worry about that. And we've kind of expanded it beyond personal growth to be whatever burning questions related to the stuff we've been sharing and experiencing here are. And then you're going to select one of those 3 techniques. And if you decide you want to do Graffiti Teen Time, there's paper in the back, there's paper up here. You're going to choose one and you're going to engage in a conversation using that technique. And we may pull you a little bit early so that we're on time for lunch, but you'll have at least 15 minutes to engage with each other. So share pet peeves, essential traits, choose your technique, and just play with it to talk about some of the questions you generated. All right, let's get started. All right, so as we come to a close, I should turn this on. I want to just say a couple words. One of the things that is challenging, so I am here to facilitate an experience where we explore student-led learning strategies, because so much of what is being used right now is very teacher-led and teacher-centered. I am not suggesting, and I just want to say this very explicitly as we come to the close, that we now abandon everything that is teacher, the role that a teacher plays in terms of instruction, facilitation, responsiveness, support. What I'm advocating for is a balance. Right? We want this balance. Of course, we have expertise, we have experience, we're the adult in the room, we're guiding, we're responding, we're instructing. We have so much value, but we cannot underestimate the value and the potential of the learners in our room, that with the right support, they can do anything. But if we never give them opportunities, they will not develop these skills. And that for me is very scary when we send them out into this world that is changing rapidly and there's a lot going on, and then constantly engaging with technology and media, and maybe don't have the skills to really interact with it in ways that are going to set them up for success. So just hear me say, I have a podcast called The Balance. It's all about balance, but we have been doing obviously a deep dive to explore this other side that I feel like is often neglected in education. So as a close, we are going to do something called a wisdom walkabout, which is really our time to consider big questions, to share our perspectives and our thoughts. Each of the tables, and I think if I'm getting this right, Sharon, correct me, it starts with one here and it goes up to the back, down to the front, up, and then there's also some up there on the terrace. And we would like to invite you. We only have just under 20 minutes, so you do not need to feel pressure to race around and put your comments on everything. You have the agency. You may pace yourself, go in any direction. If the question doesn't speak to you, go ahead and find a different question. If there are a lot of people around the table, you can kind of grab a card and find a spot to articulate your idea and then add it to the table with the question on it. And of course, if you have any burning questions for me as we're kind of coming to the end, you're welcome to seek me out. I will be available. But really, this is a time for you guys to reflect, to share. And if you see something really captivating, I encourage you to capture it so that you retain it, because I know we've gone through a lot in the last couple of days. So before I release you, there are 14 questions total. I'll put this back up in a second, but it's time to reflect. There are 14 questions. They're also in your playlist if you want to capture your thinking there. We invite you to circulate around the room, add to as many questions as you feel kind of compelled to, and feel free to capture as you go. I'll set the timer in a few minutes and just leave the questions up if you kind of want to peruse it, and then be strategic about where you go. All right, let's get started. All right, you guys. So I had two things that I usually like to close with when I work with educators as a culmination for the respect of your time, and to pass it over to Sharon to kind of close us out. I would just like to encourage you. So the last two things I had I thought I would love for you guys to do was to engage in a thinking routine. I love the thinking routines out of the Graduate School of Education for Harvard. And the one that I love people to think about at the end of an experience is, what did you come into this experience thinking about? Blended learning, universal design, workflows, and what are you thinking now? And just have that be something percolating. And then I'm also a big fan of the goal setting and the power of goal setting for the purpose of motivation. So maybe just setting a goal, like a next step, something you really want to do moving out of this experience to create some kind of change or keep conversations going. And those are on your playlist, so you can consider them after today. I want to thank you all for having me. Thank you.